And so I'm still making a lot of funny noises right now. But I'm feeling a lot better, and I'm on the antibiotic. Okay, we're good. Good. So I'd like to start with, as you know, I've made a move recently in my life. I retired from Weeks Roses in February, and I began as the curator of the rose collection at the Huntington Library and Botanical Gardens, which is only 5 miles from my home. And the Huntington is a phenomenal garden. How many of you have been to the Huntington? That's good. That's the way I like to see it. That's almost 100% across the board. It is a fantastic garden that is constantly in change. And we've come in to really rejuvenate the rose garden, get it back up and going, and turn it into the jewel that it should be as part of the collection, because it was Arabella's favorite flower. So it will always hold a place at the Huntington. And we're going to be making some great changes like modern irrigation. Wow, what a concept. And arbors that don't fall on your head. That's another concept. But all these things are set to happen. Pardon? Yes, I guarantee you, you will be able to get there. My problem now is getting stilts for all of my deadheaders for that section of the garden too. It's a fun collection. I encourage you to come back and see it. We've just reopened the Japanese garden after a remodel. It's 100 years old as of this last month. The second phase of the Chinese garden is just beginning, and the Chinese garden is about 7 years old. We're going to be doing some more companion plantings, and last year we were very fortunate to receive from one estate $100 million just for the garden, not for the library, not for the artwork, just for the garden. So we will be able to get rid of our galvanized pipe irrigation system. We're going to jump from 1940 to 2040 in technology with an irrigation system that you enact on your iPhone. Yes, so it'll be an interesting transition. But being in the Huntington and observing people coming through, of course, the constant question is, which roses are fragrant? You know, and fragrance is such a big factor. If you talk to anybody about what flowers are their favorites, and by the way, Ping stole my picture. I know, yeah. Whenever you talk to people about their favorite plant, it's always, at least 98% of the time, something that's fragrant. And I think fragrance is really something that imprints early on to a child. They're given a flower, they smell it. If it rewards them, they remember it. So some of the all-time favorites of plants are those that are heavily, heavily fragrant, like iris and hyacinth and lilacs and lilies and gardenias and peonies, and of course the rose is amongst that as well. It's been interesting though what breeding has done to change fragrance, and that's what we're going to talk about today, is kind of the history of how breeding has happened in roses and how it's affected fragrance. But I'm so happy that we don't imprint on a few other flowers that we could imprint on as children, like these guys. That's a Rafflesia up on the upper right from Burma. And it, as well as the starfish flowers in the lower portion and the arum lily, all smell of rotten meat. They're carrion flowers because they're pollinated by flies. So it behooves them to smell of rotten meat. Now the Huntington has one of these giant arums that you see on the left. And whenever it comes into flower, our attendance doubles. The staff just refers to it as Big Stinky. But it is such a novelty, and it's so unique that it draws people in from all around to see this thing and to gag with others that are observing it as well. But aren't we happy we didn't impress upon those as children, you know? Like, Mom, Rafflesia is my favorite flower. Now, you know, for years I served as one of those evil people that bred the fragrance out of roses. And it's so common to hear that as people coming through the garden. Even our docents, I just want to scream sometimes. I hear them telling them, none of the modern roses have fragrance. You know, and it's such a misnomer. It's absolutely wrong. And where I hear that coming out of their mouth, first of all, I really have to bite my tongue. But I know two things. One, they haven't been smelling any modern roses lately. And number two, they're probably just looking at florist roses and taking their opinions from that. And as we walk through why roses came up with no fragrance, we want to look at some of the genetic linkages that we feel are there. We don't absolutely know, but we feel they are there. One is weak peduncles. Don't you hate that when it happens? You know? Peduncle is the botanical term for the neck of the flower. And those of you who are botanists probably thought it was peduncle, but you know, I'm from Texas where they say let's jump in the pea cup and go to the library. So they're peduncles under the proper pronunciation. Another genetic linkage was poor color retention and clarity. Generally, if a flower is fragrant, it doesn't have the most clear color, and it doesn't keep its color well. Thirdly, in the genetic linkages is soft substance. The substance is the thickness of the petal. So if you feel a rose, some of them are very waxy. Those are the ones that last the longest in the vase. Often the fragrant roses will be very soft and will be short-lived as a result of the petal substance. And then lastly, that tie is disease susceptibility. That's been a tough one to break. So generally, if a rose is fragrant, it is more susceptible to diseases. And this is just on a historical generality, as we've seen it as breeders. So in the first case, that really came about in the early 1900s when the floral industry was catching hold in the United States. As transportation became more easy, the florist industry began to boom because they could ship flowers. And in order to pack them easier, they needed flowers with erect necks. Those flowers with the bending necks would not pack well. They would break off in the shipment. So the breeders were selecting for stem length and erect necks. So because of the tie-in genetically between weak necks and fragrance was being inadvertently thrown out the door as they selected for shippability. Sorry. Anytime you see any product where they're saying that they've selected it for shippability, beware. Remember tomatoes selected for shippability? Yes, no flavor, but they ship fantastic. Now in the 60s, the big push was for depth and purity of color. Pure yellows, pure reds. Orange was new at that point. Lavender was new at that point. The breeders were looking for stable, pure orange, stable, pure red, and brilliant, lasting yellow. And again, because of the genetic tie-in, fragrance got pushed a little further down the line. And this was more in garden roses, but also in florist roses as well. Thirdly, soft substance. This is, again, probably more concerned with florist roses than it is with garden roses, because now that these roses are coming in from South America and from far fields, guess what? The nasty word shippability comes in again. So in order to make them stable enough to ship and last for 14 days, they're looking at substance. So by selecting for substance, fragrance goes a little further down the line. And you'll notice that a lot of the new florist roses today have the same quality that St. Patrick has. They have chlorophyll in the petals. You'll see that especially on the guard petals before they're plucked off for the florist. And that chlorophyll keeps a really stiff petal and makes them very shippable. And by the end of that breeding, they have something almost as romantic as an artichoke. I mean, squeeze some of those flowers. They sound like an artichoke. And there's absolutely no fragrance to them at all. And then lastly, this big one comes into the garden trade, and now it's coming into the florist trade, the need for disease resistance. And because of that linkage, of course, knockout made a big impact, but no fragrance at all. However, there's a new rose just this year called Francis Mayon that is a big breakthrough in disease resistance, and it's a hybrid tea, and it's very, very fragrant. So it has happened that we've broken that tie between fragrance and disease resistance, but the fragrance you're going to be seeing in these disease-resistant roses is not the classic damask fragrance. It's some of the other fragrances that happen in the rose family. Excuse me. It just bleeped at me. I think not. Yeah, I'm taking too long, obviously. So look for Francis Mayon on the market. Now, I was really sold on the disease resistance of this. However, last week I visited the New York Botanic Garden, where evidently the race of black spot in that garden has made its way into this rose. I've seen it clean in other locales, but this was the first time to see it actually infected. And you have to think about it. Mother Nature is breeding funguses a lot faster than we're breeding roses. And those funguses evolve. They don't stay the same, and neither does the rose. So no matter what we put before her, she will challenge it and break it down in the long run. I wonder why my graphics are messing up. The other thing I find when people smell roses is they're not smelling the proper rose at the proper time. So what is the best time to tell people to smell, or the best flower to smell? So you want to choose a newly opened or just opened flower. I watch a lot of public come through the garden, find the oldest flower on the plant, stick their nose in it and say, it's not fragrant. Well, it's been open for 3 days. You know, that you got to take that into account. Secondly, smell in the cool of the evening or the morning or the early evening when the humidity is higher. That's a big factor to keep the fragrance oils more around the flower. And thirdly, clear out your sniffer. Yes. And Christian has this, he's certain that thrips are going to burrow into his brain. So he's always clearing out the blossom very thoroughly before he smells it. You may not want to go to that extent. However, some of his activities could be blamed on that burrowing. You got to remember, too, that everybody tastes things differently, everybody smells things differently. That's a big factor. The gender is something I've observed over time. Women will smell certain smells that men do not. I think men smell fresh-cut apple a lot easier than women do. Women smell the fruity fragrance a lot easier than men do. So there's some genetic linkage. The location of the rose. Color Magic, California, can't smell it. In my parents' garden in Texas, it's the most fragrant variety in their garden. And it's easily smelled. I can't explain it. You would think that we'd have points in the California atmosphere that would be plenty humid for that variety to be fragrant. But it just varies from place to place and time of day and time of year. One time, Tom and Louie came to visit and brought this bouquet of Touch of Class in early December. Touch of Class never has fragrance. That bouquet would just bowl you over with its fragrance, that very late season bloom on it. And of course, time of day too. And then the state of your brain. If there's been any recent burrowing by thrips, you've got to watch it. So let's talk about some of the different types of fragrance, and you're all welcome to disagree with me on this. It's like wine tasting. You might taste the same wine, and you can get a totally different opinion from every person that you talk to. I mean, I read some of these wine descriptions, and they talk about leather, and I'm tasting it thinking, leather? Where did leather come from on this? So these are a little call, you know, an individual call. But the damask fragrance is sort of the classic rose fragrance, and I brought two up for me that have at least part of that fragrance, and we get all kinds of combinations of fragrances too. But to me, these two really have a lot of the damask fragrance. Mr. Lincoln fragrance is the classic damask fragrance. Then there's licorice. You find licorice more commonly in the yellow colors. So Julia Child, I think, has a wonderful sweet licorice fragrance. And then, of course, white licorice, hence its name, has an extremely strong licorice fragrance. Fresh cut apple. This is something I really like as a fragrance. Playboy, to me, is very redolent to fresh cut apple. A lot of the Poulsen varieties coming out of Denmark have that apple fragrance to them. And Soaring Spirits, the climber, bears a lot of the apple fragrance. Then the fruity fragrance. This one kind of gets past me. Again, it's mostly in yellows. And I don't smell yellow roses too often. I have to get other people to smell for me and tell me if they're fragrant. Julie Newmar, wonderful fruity fragrance. Really nice on that. And then Over the Moon from Pierre O'Rard. And there are many, many types on this. Citrus Blossom, also called the elusive Lemon Pledge fragrance. And they can smell a lot like Lemon Pledge. White Lightning, if you remember that old timer, had a lot of that citrus blossom fragrance, and Angel Face as well. The lavenders in general will possess this fragrance more as a color than others. Yeah, lemon spice, perfectly. The honey fragrance might be a little more elusive. I never thought gourmet popcorn was fragrant until we were taking pictures of a tree one day and left it in the studio because the day was late. Opened up that studio the next morning and the smell of honey just bowled you over, and that was gourmet popcorn. And for years, J&P sold Iceberg in their fragrant collection, claiming it as having a honey fragrance. So we'll put it in here for right now. I mean, if J&P says it, it has to be right, correct? Spice is an all-time fragrant. I think Fragrant Cloud is fabulous spice fragrance. But rock and roll has that great spicy fragrance too. And this is Eyes for You. You've seen a little bit of this on some of the Healthemia breeding coming from Peter James in the UK. Wonderful spicy fragrance on his hybrids, his Healthemia hybrids. And this is a large flower type. It's problematic to get a plant underneath it, so I don't know if it'll ever make it into the United States. And the flowers love English weather more than they do California weather. But it is a lovely fragrance on these roses. The clove fragrance, mostly in the purple tones, and it mostly comes from the breeding of Rosa californica a few generations back behind it. So Ebb Tide and Diamond Eyes both possess that strong clove fragrance. I think Diamond Eyes, the relatively new miniature, is really redolent of cloves. And for have a miniature with that much fragrance is very nice. You know Grandma's cold cream, Pond's. Remember Pond's? Yep. Sugar Moon smells exactly like Pond's cold cream to me. Great, bright white, long stems, hybrid tea. So fragrant, so fragrant on it. And then there's myrrh, and I'm sorry my letters are shifting. A lot of the Austin varieties have this myrrh fragrance, like Lady Emma Hamilton and the Ambridge Rose. Now sometimes myrrh gets confused as we go into the next category. People get them a little bit confused. The next category is cat box. Sometimes myrrh is cat box, sometimes it's not. And maybe that comes from the Rosa fetida bloodline, hence the name fetid on it. And Cinco de Mayo does have a touch of cat box to it. And again, only discovered because I threw a tree in full flower into my van and shut the doors for a while, and then had to get inside the van and drive it. Yeah. Now, since we didn't get to give you our usual talk about what's new, I got to sneak it in because Christian didn't get a chance. And we do have some new varieties to talk about because even though I'm retired from Weeks Roses, my seedlings will be coming out for another 5-6 years along the way. That's the nice part about being a hybridizer. It's hard at the first 6 years when you have nothing, but then after you retire, you get that benefit. And we do have some All-America or AOE winners to brag about. Ann Hooper is just a delightful little blooming fool of a plant. And it's white with a broad pink picotee and a fairly contained plant, probably about 2 feet tall, a little more upright in its habit, very bushy, lovely sprays on it. And Butter Me Up, a yellow miniature from Christian's breeding work with beautiful bud form, gets to be a pretty good sized plant. What would you say, Christian? Give me a habit. 5 feet? No, not that bad. Come on. I will say I've seen it 3.5 feet tall. But it blooms like mad on this plant in great stem length. Now, what were the parents on Butter Me Up, Christian? Come on. Well, Ann Hooper was Santa Claus and Gold Marie, correct? Yeah. Now, that's a kinky hybridizing fact for you guys to remember. Santa Claus is a fantastic mother, but he's a lousy father. Yeah. Playgirl is a lousy mother, but she's a great father. Great father. Then for 2013, 2 other miniatures, actually 3 others that have won the award. We've already talked about Diamond Eyes. Now, Diamond Eyes, if you look at the genetics of it, it had Night Owl just 2 generations behind it, the huge climber. And this was the only miniature seedling in the entire family. The rest of them ranged anywhere from mini climbers to shrubs to large flowered climbing types. But here was this one little dwarf guy with this fantastic color. And it's the one that's coming forward. And then Christian's variety, Whimsy, which is bred directly out of Double Knockout. Double Knockout is the pollen parent on it. It has pretty darn good cleanliness. And like a lot of the hand-painted seedlings, it shows the hand-painted more when the weather is cool. But then it becomes a regular bicolor, but the colors are bright and showy and a really floriferous, vigorous plant. And then the one that's going to be tough to find this year, because it's really not going to hit the marketplace into next year, is You're the One. Beautiful pink blend variety. And it blushes a little bit darker on the finish, gorgeous bud form. This and Ann Hooper are sister seedlings from the same cross, same year on it. And they were miniatures. These are all miniatures right now. Yeah. So keep an eye out for that one. It will be more available this next season. Then peeking into 2014, we've got a great deep orange gold hybrid tea that's just recently been named Good as Gold, and it's just been registered. And this is a cross of Golden Beauty and About Face. It's a vigorous bushy plant, intense color. It's hard to say if it's deep yellow or orange. It's right in that range. Prolific bloomer, long stems, mediocre disease resistance, probably happier sprayed, but the color is just a knockout. Now it does fade some on the finish. It doesn't hold that clarity of color I could wish that it does, but the initial color is so beautiful. And this is good old R224-4. And if you come up with a name, Christian is accepting all nominations at the moment. Yes, yeah. There we go. This is a sister seedling to Sparkle and Shine, which is Julie Newmar and Julia Child. Another kinky hybridizing fact. Julia Child is a great dad, but not very good as a mom. And you will see a third sister emerging from this family the following year. Good old Q507B3. Moonstone Hot Cocoa. Grandiflora, fairly upright, beautiful color combination. So they open cream and blush orange with some smoke in it. And then an old-fashioned, large flowered yellow grandie called Happy Go Lucky. This is Strike It Rich and Julia Child as parents. A big round plant, about a 5-foot ball of a plant at maturity with lots of big old-fashioned blooms. I think we have some time for questions if you guys are up to it. Oh, good. I've talked you to smithereens.
Well, as good as gold, we will not have to go like two.
And R224?
No.
No, you won't. Okay.
Any mail order that buys product from Weeks will have them this year.
You got that? Evans. Oh, a lot of the preaching ones. Yes? Yeah. Yeah.
What about diamondites? Where will that be available?
Diamond should be more broadly available this year. It was sold by Weeks as a wholesale as well as other growers. Guys, have a great trip tonight. Thank you for all the convention